What is going on, everyone? Chris with Journals, Comics, and Pop Culture. Today's video is going to be discussing problems in the CGC census and how we look at it for data and how we assess things on the comic book market. This is going to pair into my year-long theme for 2022 about being educated buyers this year, all right? I really am going to be producing a lot of content to where we're taking a lot of things in to critically think about things to become educated buyers, which hopefully can help allow the comic book industry and market be even more healthy. Before we get into it, if you aren't subscribed to the channel, please take some time to do so. Check out all the awesome links below as well, including my official merch link. We got my Patreon link that you can help support the channel for only $3.99 a month to get extra perks. And also you can click that join button below and join as a YouTube channel member for only $1.99 a month. But let's just get right into this topic. I talked a decent amount about CGC as of late, but this is completely different. I mean, we're looking specifically at how we view, counts on the CGC census. So for those that may not know what I'm talking about, CGC does keep a census of how many books in specific grades are out there. So for an example, if you're looking at UF4 9.8s, there's say, roughly 4,000 9.8s on the market. How do they take in this data? Well, every time they grade a book, those numbers go into the census. Now, the first flaw, which is just kind of a tidbit aside talking point here real quick, is when you have a graded comic book, right? And so this 9.8 was graded, got a 9.6, it's on the census. A Spectacular Spider-Man 27 and a 9.6 is on the census. It's counted, right? If I cracked this open and didn't inform CGC, this book would still be sitting on the census. So they still think that there's one out there, but it's no longer out there. So essentially they should subtract one from the census. You can, what CGC wants you to do when you crack open books is they want you to send in the label back to them so they can then, take the barcode, scan it, and take it off the census. Does that make sense? Now, I'm sure a lot of people do that, but I know for a fact there's a lot of people that don't. That's one flaw, but it's not the big flaw I want to focus on for this video today. I want to focus on how the amount on the census persuades our purchasing decisions. And it comes back to the argument of scarcity and rarity. And I made a video in the past how I said scarcity doesn't always equal rarity. Yes, sometimes they're interwoven and they are one of the same, but it's not always like that, okay? For comic books might not be rare in terms of, say, print run, and there's a lot out there, but they could be scarce on the market. And this goes to supply and demand, and I talk about this quite a lot as well. Supply and demand with comic books. Supply is only what's available on the market at any given time. So if there's a 200,000 print run of a book, but only a couple hundred of them are on the market at any given time, that 200 and something, that's the supply. And if the demand is higher than the supply, well, that supply is a bit scarce, right? So let's look at, again, let's use UF4 as an example. UF4 had roughly around 70,000 books printed for its first print run, roughly, okay? There are, last time I looked, there was roughly around, I want to say maybe right under 4,000, anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 9.8s on the census. So I'm not going to say that that's scarce, but it's a lot less than that 70,000 print run. So, you do want to take into consideration what is on the census if you're looking to buy graded books. Because you're not going to make a purchasing decision and say, well, how should I value this book? Well, there's a 70,000 print run. I mean, that's quite a lot still, especially for modern books where a lot of them have maybe roughly average around 40 to 50,000. So you could say, well, for a book that came out in 2011, that's a pretty high print run still. So why is this book so much? Well, if people are really searching out the book in a CGC 9.8, there could be a really high demand specifically for that grade point specifically for that product, CGC that is, and there might be more than 3,000 people out there looking for that book at a time. Now, at one time. Now, keep in mind too, just because there's 3,000 on the census doesn't mean that whole supply is available at any given time, because I know darn well a lot of them are for personal collections and in people's PCs. So that can make the book in a 9.8 even scarcer on the market at any given time. And all it takes for that price to increase is for there to be more people wanting that book than there is of that book currently for sale on the market. Does that make sense? Okay, now let's talk about where it could become problematic to where we can essentially overpay for a book. Because what I was just describing is a situation of standard supply and demand increasing past supply. There is a scarcity on the market at any given time, and the price goes up because of that. But let's talk about books that maybe get hot out of nowhere because of speculation. We saw it with West Coast Avengers 45 when White Vision showed up in WandaVision last year. I watched it live. I think a 9.8 was selling for around 150, and it hit a peak of like 1,500 in a matter of a few days. It was absolutely nuts. Well, you got to ask yourself the questions of what I just asked. Is it rare? Well, it's probably a high print run, so it's not necessarily rare. Is it scarce on the market? Oh, ding, 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 ding. Scarce on the market. So let's go back to that. What does that mean? Now, West Coast 45, first appearance of White Vision, it wasn't a dollar bin book. It was, I think roughly, in a high grade raw, I think it was probably about a $15 to $20 book before the boom, before the spec, and there's White Vision in a TV show. Let's go buy it. It was roughly probably a $15 to $20 book in a really high grade. I'm sure you can find a bunch of copies for under $10 in your random LCSs and whatnot. Like I said, I think the 9.8 was selling at about 150. So that to me tells me that there's definitely some out there, and there's a little bit of a demand, but it's nothing crazy at all. So when this TV show hit and the spec was real, people decided, we saw this person in a live action show, now we want it. Demand did this. It went through the roof. And I can almost assure you that the book ended up being scarce on the market, especially when we're looking at 9.8s. Because there probably weren't much on the census to begin with. Because it wasn't some crazy book like, Hulk 181 or even a UF4. So what did that do? It showed you that demand increased way past the current supply. The current supply. Well, what's on eBay at 12 o'clock at night when this episode just premiered and we're seeing White Vision, or even the next few days to come? What's on eBay? Probably not a lot, because not a lot of people were sending their books in to try to get this book graded in a 9.8. You could probably check the census at that point in time, and there's probably a very limited amount even on the census. That's what drove that book up so high so fast. But what do you think people that sell comics or that were looking to flip maybe and make a profit did as soon as they knew White Vision showed up? They went digging through their back issue bins, and they were pulling out their West Coast Avengers 45s, and they were sending them into CGC. So now you probably had dozens upon dozens, maybe even hundreds of books of folks trying to get those high grades, those 9.8s. And then, of course, CGC takes time. It could take 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months for your books to come back. So again, let's fast forward 6, 7, 8 months later. Now finally all those people that jumped to sending their books to CGC, they're getting them back and they're putting them on the market. Now, people have probably maybe moved on. Maybe the demand isn't as high, and you got this influx of 9.8s now, and now the supply surpasses demand, and it is no longer scarce on the market. Okay? So that's one way where you got to be careful on a book that hits fast. Another one, and I talked about this recently, another one that hit recently was Uncanny XMen number 282, second print. That's the first cameo appearance of Gambit, first cover appearance. Excuse me, not a Gambit. That's the first cameo appearance of Bishop, first cover appearance of Bishop. So I know there was a couple YouTubers that talked about this book, and said, oh, for a book that you could probably find for under $20 raw, it's a decent investment, low risk. And I agree with that. That's a very sound investment. But then people get that FOMO, especially if they see a popular YouTuber, talking about it. And then they're going out and looking for this book. And what did people do? They went out and looked for this book in a 9.8. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. We talked about this recently on the Combo Book Canon top 10 when it soared and it hit the top 10. And a 9.8 second print sold for, I do believe, over $500 or roughly around that. Absolutely nuts. And a lot of people, the talk was, there's not a lot of these books on the census. Let me tell you why that doesn't matter and why that can be, why that could feed a misconception and a misunderstanding of census numbers. So people can look and say, oh my gosh, there's only a few on the census. That must means it's the value of the book should be more than it is. That's not the case. For this book specifically, this Uncanny 282 second print, I guarantee you the only reason it was extremely, I think there was like 20 something on the census. Why? It's not because it's scarce, really scarce or rare, right? It's because nobody cared about it. Nobody really was caring to spend $30+ to send that book in to try to get a 9.8 CGC grade. That's why. So that paints a different picture of what a fair market value should be for the book. Don't you think? So what happened was, instead of, if there was speculation or a YouTuber talking about it, and then people might say, oh, well, let me go grab my books and send them into CGC to try to get that 9.8 grade so I could put it on the market. If people simply chilled and didn't have the FOMO to go spend $500, because essentially the amount of books was scarce at the time, because maybe there was only one or two selling on eBay, right? And everyone watched this, a couple YouTubers talk about it. Boom, let's go on to eBay and let's bid each other up. All it takes, what do I always say? It takes only a couple of people to bid that book up. Way crazy to crazy heights. But then if people catch up, if anybody selling or flippers or dealers catch up on this, and they're all sending their 9.8s to CGC and they all come back, what's going to happen in that scarcity? It's going to be non-existent. So the scarcity can be misleading too. Okay? We're not allowing the supply essentially to organically catch up to what the real demand is. All right? If we just realized that, or whoever paid the $500 for that book, I'm sure there was a couple of people bidding it up. If they just realized that, look, I know this is the only one there, but it doesn't mean that it's rare. Let's wait for the market to catch up. Let's wait for these sellers to get their books back and put them up on eBay. Or, as a buyer, you could sit and say, I'm gonna search for a high grade raw and send it into CGC myself, hoping to get that 9.8, whatever the case may be. We don't have to sit here and think that we need to pay $500 for a book because we don't want to miss out, because we think that there's some type of other value there because we're reading numbers wrong. We're saying there's only 25 on the census, so that must mean it's valuable. No, that must mean that demand is really high and supply is really low. No, because again, all it takes is two people sitting in front of their computer bidding that book up. And before I wrap up this statement today, it goes back as well to being conscious of most recent sale. We don't always have to focus on most recent sale as an indicator. If that most recent sell is an outlier, it doesn't mean that we need to look at that and say, oh, that last one sold for $500, but The one before that, the 4 or 5 before that over the last few months before sold for only 120. I don't need to look at that last one sold at that 500 price point and think that I need to pay that much. There needs to be more indicators on the market telling me that, yes, this is a fair market value. This is what the value should be due to both supply and demand working organically, if that makes sense. So, I'll end the video on this note, folks. While CGC census counts are valid to understanding why there's validity for a book to increase in value, because remember, print run isn't everything, especially for 9.8s. There's a huge focus and a huge demand on 9.8s. So if you have a book that has a print run of 50, 70, or even 100,000, but there's only a couple thousand on the census, with a lot of those being books that are sitting in personal collections, the reason why that book is increasing in value in that CGC 9.8 can be very, very valid. But on the flip side of that, just because there's a limited amount on the census doesn't mean there's even really a demand for it. All right? And a lot of times those things are in correlation with each other. Low census count, low demand. Not many people sending it in, not many people caring to. What does that mean? So you got to think, folks. You got to think for yourself. Okay? So again, I hope you guys could take a little bit from this. Be smart in 2022 when you're buying decisions and you're purchasing decisions. Have patience. Do your due diligence. Ask questions. Don't just take YouTubers' words for it, including mine. You know, do your research, folks. I would love to hear all your guys' thoughts in the comments below. And again, if you are joining just for the first time, and you haven't subscribed yet, please take some time to do so. 10,000 subscriber contest coming up real soon. It's going to be massive. I promise you guys. Promise. Thank you all so much for watching. Be well. And until next time. PopCultureZone.com is an online shop focusing on hot new comics, including exclusive and incentive variants, CGC graded comics, and tons of other inventory, including pop culture toys and other collectibles, all at low and competitive prices. PopCultureZone.com ships all over the US, and if you are buying raw comics, they offer flat rate shipping of only $4.99. That's right, $4.99. Absolute craziness, right? And there's no taxes included, excluding New Jersey. Pop Culture Zone is also on eBay, where they hold a 100% positive feedback rating with over 8,000 completed transactions for this year alone. Make sure to check out the link to their website below, as well as their eBay link, so be sure to give them a follow there as well.